What is happening out there, Roto Scouts basketball fans? Happy New Year, gang. 2025. Congratulations. Whenever you were born, I think you've officially made it to the future, at least from when I was born. I mean, going back 2025, watching that was probably, we're probably in the area in which Jean-Claude Van Damme traveled to the future in Time Cop. We're well beyond the future that Marty McFly traveled to in Back to the Future. It's wild. Just noticing how ripped my shirt is. There's an old punk rock t-shirt from back in the day. This shirt's probably older than some people watching this show. Speaking of things that have gotten to the future from way in the past. This one's for the band called Good Riddance. Great old political punk band. Well, we won't get into it. Cujo's here. Good to see you, Cuj. Definitely thoughts out to the folks in New Orleans who were hurt or worse in what looks like another shitty incident out in the world. Crazy things happening to start 2025. But yeah, I saw that. I haven't gotten into the story yet. I just caught like a glimpse of the headline and the thingy on my forehead too. What is that? There we go. But yeah, I saw they postponed the Sugar Bowl because of it. I think I saw that pop up. But yeah, wild and unfortunate way to start 2025, but probably setting the tone for what's going to be a completely crazy topsy-turvy year as the last few have. Anyway, let's get into an NBA slate, huh? 6 games on DraftKings, 8 games on FanDuel to talk about. A lot of moving parts on this one. Some already critical values and some uncomfortable spots with players we don't really love who are going to be coming up as fairly important. But hello to Anthony Taylor. He's here as well, agreeing with Cujo. And yeah, again, I think we're all easily in agreement with that. Andy, Happy New Year to you too, pal. Postponed until Thursday for the Sugar Bowl. Okay. That's a big wait. Oh, no, wait. Today's Wednesday. So that's tomorrow. Or next Thursday. Feels like Monday. Yesterday, I had basically no idea what it was. And then today, it's like a hard restart, and it feels like Monday. So weird. They're playing tomorrow. Okay. That makes sense. But anyway, interesting one to start the year. I'm going to dive in and starting a little bit late here at 5 o'clock. Never when I like to get these shows started. I like to have more time to talk about it. I don't like to run headlong into the bigger, more established shows, but here we are. So let's get into this a little bit, and we'll talk about the game environments. Vegas board, first game up is Chicago and Washington on that one. Doing it in a different order, you could talk about Orlando and Detroit first. You've also got the Pellies and the Heat game early on in the evening. Actually, what is it? It's 2 7 o'clocks and then 3 7:30s to start that DraftKings slate. So yeah, it's actually kind of a sprint slate on DraftKings. The last game starts at 8 o'clock, Dallas and Houston. But starting things off, depending on where you're looking at it, the Chicago and Washington game, super interesting, 238-point total there. Chicago favored by 6 on the road in Washington. Very big, pacey game on both sides. There should be a ton of points scored. There should be a lot of fantasy scoring. A lot to work with in that one all around. So we're going to see some definite big shares going in that direction. An uglier game in the next one, Orlando at Detroit. Detroit favored by 2 in a home game. Just a 213-point total. Really still looking like kind of just an are who they are spot on both sides of that one, I think. We'll see how everybody came up. The one questionable that leaps to mind was Anthony Black. I think he's still questionable as of the last time I looked at the injuries. So we've got that maybe as a moving part on Orlando. Otherwise, it's just the guys who have already been out. I think we're getting a pretty big FanDuel share on Goga as I was scanning the board before. I had to rerun the DraftKings sim. A couple guys didn't come through properly. So I got to glance at some of the exposures, and I think I remember seeing a big exposure on him. He had gained power forward eligibility on FanDuel, which had made him very interesting a couple slates ago. So we'll take a look at that. We'll see what comes up out of that one, though, but it's the least appealing game environment on the board. That's a 213. Everything else is at least 220 plus. 220 and a half in the next one is actually the second lowest. That's New Orleans and Miami. New Orleans missing the guys they've been missing. It's the same kind of a thing. Both teams looking essentially like what they are, at least in the right now sense. And then we've got, what do we have questionables from that one? Is there anything critical in that one? Duncan Robinson is questionable on the Miami side. Could create a little bit of a shakeup. We'll go through the injuries and everything, but it's the other one that's looking kind of like an Are Who They Are game. Then we get some more interesting ones. We've got a tight game between Brooklyn and Toronto. We've got the debut of D'Lo with the Nets. He's a gigantic piece on the DraftKings slate because he's very cheap and presumption of minutes and production. It's just driving him up to the top of the board on DK. We'll take a look at that. He's going to be the top exposed player, I think, when we scroll down the board there and look at DK. But definitely some pieces and parts on the Nets side. They're missing a ton of guys, again, as usual. And then the Toronto side, there are a number of questions. RJ Barrett's questionable. Grady Dick, IQ, Jacoby Walter, all questionable. So we could see a big shakeup on the Toronto side of that one. And it's already, the game environment there is not bad, and it's pushing some guys in already. Utah at the Knicks. Knicks favored by 12.5 in a home game. 230-point total, though. It's a nice, juicy total. They're playing a pushover Utah team that everybody's been scoring big totals against. Love the Knicks starters. They're probably just going to play their usual 35, 36 minutes apiece, regardless of how this game goes. Tibbs does not tend to pull them for the fourth quarter. Tibbs rarely empties the bench and pulls everybody out. He just lets these guys run. So, Knicks starters for sure. Pieces and parts from the Utah side, yeah, I don't see why not, at least given that game total. That is the second highest total on the board. The third highest total for the FanDuel slate. The Atlanta-Denver game is a monster. And then rounding out for DraftKings, Houston favored by 5 in a home game against Dallas. Dallas still with no Luka. We're basically acclimated to that scenario already, I think, in the Dallas pricing and positional values. But we'll take a look at how they come up. On the Houston side, nothing overly interesting springs to mind, but we'll give it a look. Amen Thompson's out. That'll create a little bit of mix and match through the middle, perhaps. That one's a 222.5 point total. Mid kind of a game, but definitely one you're going to want some parts from, I think, on that DraftKings slate as your late night game. But again, that's at 8 o'clock, so there's not a ton of swapping time on DraftKings today. And then the two FanDuel games. The Atlanta-Denver game, again, a monster situation. We do have Trae Young is probable, as is Dyson Daniels, and then we've got Bogdan's doubtful, Larry Nance is out, so there's a number of different pieces for Atlanta that are missing or question marks. We also had Jalen Johnson went questionable as of like an hour and change ago. So definitely a spot to keep an eye on for Atlanta. They already look like a strong option, though. They're 7-point underdogs in Denver, 246.5 point total, by far the biggest game on the slate. Denver looking like a or who they are situation, but everybody on that end typically looks good or are Nikola Jokic who you just want to get to. So definitely another interesting game, and for FanDuel, that's a nice one to have on the late slate. And then Philly and Sacramento to round things out. Sacramento with the new coaching in place and maybe minor downturns in the extreme minutes that those starters were playing. They're favored by 6.5, 222.5 point total. Philly without Joel Embiid, without KJ Martin, Jared McCain still. Keegan Murray is doubtful on the Sacto side of that one. Probably just going to come up as an or who they are kind of a game. Injury stuff real quick. Again, Jalen Johnson, that was the last news that I put up on the site. Was he probable or was he not on the injury report? I think he was not on the injury report and then went questionable. So that's one to watch, obviously, when a guy pops up like that. It's always concerning. Probables for the day, Jalen Smith, Dalen Terry. Bub Carrington's available after getting wheelchaired off yesterday. I didn't actually see what happened there, but apparently he's available, so good news there. Jalen Suggs, Cade Cunningham, Nikola Jovic is available. Colin Sexton is available. Dyson Daniels and Trae Young are both probable. Questionables for the day. There's some big ones in here. Zach LaVine, Jordan Poole, Anthony Black, RJ Barrett, Grady Dick, Emmanuel Quickley, Jacoby Walter, Jeremiah Robinson Earl, Duncan Robinson, Jalen Brunson, technically still questionable for the Knicks. He was questionable last time he ended up playing. I would fully expect Brunson to play, but I guess if you are considering it from a perspective of teams against which you can give guys days off, this would definitely qualify as one of those matchups. So at least keep an eye on it. We know what to do in that situation. Deuce goes up, as do Campaign and Landry Shamet. They'll both just inherit some minutes and inherit some responsibilities. All very playable guys. Continuing the questionables, Derek Lively questionable, Tari Eason, Andre Drummond, Eric Gordon, Kyle Lowry, Kelly Oubre, and Jay Crowder all questionable. So a ton of still question marks on the Philly game in the late night window. And then the outs, Torrey Craig is out, Ayo Dosunmu, Marvin Bagley, Sadiq Bey, Paulo Banchero, Franz Wagner, Mo Wagner, Simone Fontecchio, Bojan Bogdanovic, DeAnthony Melton, Cam Thomas, Trendon Watford, Zaire Williams, Bruce Brown, Jose Alvarado, Brandon Ingram, Carlo Makovich, Zion Williamson, Terry Rozier, Drew Smith, Josh Richardson, John Collins, Taylor Hendricks, Cody Williams. Cody, by the way, was projected on some sites. He is with the G League team, so don't play him. That's why I put him in the outs. He's not actually hurt. He's just in the G League. I don't usually list the G League guys, but I did see him getting some minutes in other places. Mitch Robinson continues to be out. Luka continues to be out. Dante Exum, Najee Marshall, Amin Thompson, Bogdan Bogdanovic, who's doubtful technically. Bogdan's doubtful. I read somebody else is out that's doubtful. Jose Alvarado is doubtful technically. But I always consider the doubtful guys out. Kobe Buffkin, Larry Nance, Vlaco Konkar, Aaron Gordon, Joel Embiid, KJ Martin, Jared McCain, Devin Carter, and Keegan Murray is doubtful. And that's your slate. Handful of people here hanging out. Small group, late start, late show, New Year's Day, weird slate. I get it. I was honestly waffling for a little bit about whether there would be a show. I was putting this ugly slate together, and I was like, ugh, such a slog through this one. But there's some interesting stuff to talk about. And I always want to be here, you know? Top of the board is empty on the DraftKings side because we're different slates, as usual. So we're sorted by DK rates in our top 150 exposure. And then I'm going to cut it by FanDuel positioning. And we'll talk about everybody, as per usual. Hopefully you guys are doing well out there. Hit the like button as we get started. I'm assuming it's all regulars here, so I'm not going to do a lot of selling. But if you're unfamiliar, if you're new, if you stumbled across the channel, rotoscouts.com, under $1 a day for access to NBA, NFL, and NHL right now, adding MLB. I'm toying with the idea of trying to figure out some PGA projections for this year. We'll see what happens. But we're going to be growing. There's going to be adding things to the site. So get in now, under $1 a day for access to all of it, whatever comes. But right now, it's the 4 major sports. So looking first at the differentiated FanDuel guys from those late games, because there are some really interesting pieces for FanDuel. Tyrese Maxey is looking like an absolutely dominant spot, nearly 50% of our lineups. I would take more. He looks pretty terrific in that matchup. 8,700 at point guard. We're getting him 49.3% of the time, way above the field. He's a 5.34 value score when we're looking for 5+. We've also, that one's concerning. Remember, I said there are some uncomfortable guys coming up as pretty big options on both sites, and Ben Simmons on FanDuel is one of them. We'll get to him in a second, but his point guard eligibility, he's got point and power forward, which is unique distribution positionally. But with him coming up at 60% and then with 50% basically going to Tyrese, with at least some crossover through the point guard position, it might cut down shares artificially of some of these other guys. Depends where those Simmons shares fall on FanDuel. But a big piece on the full slate and then a big piece from the 2 late games for point guard distribution on FanDuel. And honestly, Trae Young is pulling, assuming he plays, 22% at the point. So there's some very clear paths to point guard. We're basically level with the field on Trae. But considering he's pulling a 5.2 value score, he's a 1.24 per minute player for the season, I really would take more of them if it comes up, or if we can push things in a certain direction to just try and claim more and build a little position. As usual, that's definitely a play. I'd rather be a little bit ahead of the field than dead even with the field on that one because of how it's coming up. You could play it the other way, but I consider Trae a topside play where I would definitely want to take a little bit more there. Got him at 36 minutes. I think there's reasonable expectation that he could come out and put something like that up pretty easily. And that plays tonight. Darren Fox, mix and match shares. Jamal Murray, same deal. Paul George, we did get a pretty decent amount of exposure to. Again, no Embiid and a lot of other question marks for Philly. So all the guys that are currently coming up for Philly, if other guys don't play, would only continue to look better. So you get more of Paul George in that situation, but we're already getting him 22%. He's more heavily owned by the field in the ownership that this sim ran against, but definitely looks worth playing. He's just under the value threshold at 4.98. Good per minute rates in this situation. He's a 1.07 player overall this season. Definitely worth getting to. Russ Westbrook continuing to start for reasons. The team is doing well since he's been starting, so I guess there's that. But in a fantasy sense, he continues to be good. 1.19 per minute. You just play him. 14.6% exposed. We are below the field, but he is a 5+ value guy. So, considering where we're starting from, my direction of it, if I had to choose, build a position in one direction or another, I'm not going to want to go back to the field and spend the effort, diminish other areas of other lineups just to get him level with the field. So directionally, if I was going to change this from where we're at, and I think where we're at is perfectly fine, I would probably draw it downward and take like 10% and get some shares of something better and let the field have more Russ. That's not to say that I think he's a bad play. It's just, I'm comfy here. That's where I would want to be. But if I was forced to make a decision positionally, it's just, it just speaks to my approach of just not wanting to bring guys, just float them back to the field because you gain no ground. Malik Monk at 19% level with the field, looking like himself, essentially. 34 minutes at 6,500 is worth buying, nearly 20% of our lineups. And then 15% of Kelly Oubre if he goes, and 10% and a little bit below the field on Christian Brown. Only onesie, twosie shares of anybody else. It's another weird one. Some of these, I gotta ping. Give me 1 second here, actually. I'm just gonna send Blaine a quick note. Hey, heads up, DK upload was funky. Who's out? Keon Wilson and a few others. Just ran into a little issue, and it's probably something on my end, but I want to just call it out to Blaine real quick over at Ace Mine, because some of these guys, for whatever reason today, this is the first time I've seen this, in my upload, didn't go through, even though it looks like they were properly formatted. So I just want to make sure. I think that's what happened with Eric Gordon there. And, that's not a name convention guy, right? If it was Eric Gordon IV, I could understand it because there's those wacky name things. But, one of the other ones was Duncan Robinson. And that's what I had to go in and rerun for. I just didn't happen to catch Eric Gordon. But, you can see Dunk Robinson's back in the sim and came up like normal the second time around. So I just wanted to shout that out over to Blaine real quick so he could take a look. That's what's great about Ace Mine, though. I mean, you let these guys know you've got immediate access to the guys who own, operate, and program the site. So you tell them something, and it's like, let me get on that. Let me fix that. Pretty great. And they got great pricing over there, too. So, talking about uncomfy guys. D'Angelo Russell. Top of the board on DraftKings. I told you. 52.6% exposed. That's well ahead of the field for what ran here. But as usual, I think their top-end ownership is a little bit light. That ran with D'Lo in the high 30s, I think. And I'm expecting it to be more like this. So I think that's more of a close-to-the-field number. Not sure exactly where he's projected at other places. Duncan Robinson is now going by Sir Duncan Robinson. Knew it. Had to be something. That would be hilarious if I think Didi Gregorius was knighted by the Netherlands. I think he's technically Sir Didi Gregorius, not that he plays anymore, but if Baseball Reference Fangraphs started doing that on the back end after the last couple of years, they added all the accents and everything that nobody wanted. Nothing like making a change and then having to make global changes across your entire site to accommodate the change that you made in one other spot. They added all those ASCII columns and everything. It's we know you actually want the just blank names, but so dumb. Anyway, so D'Lo, yeah, he is 5,100 point guard and shooting guard eligible on DraftKings, and basically a top priority. Think what you want of him. I am not a huge fan. 0.90 per minute on FanDuel, 0.94 per minute on DraftKings, but going to be fully unleashed here in Brooklyn to do whatever he wants while running this team right now. So I see no reason to go away from it. I think that's a broken price, and that's what's pushing all this value. 5.83. It's not like we're talking about one of the runaway freight train 7+ values where he's at 3,000, by accident or anything. But as far as just normal pieces that are misshapen by an inappropriate price, that's a critical piece on DraftKings today, 52%. And then you look over at FanDuel, and we didn't get a single share in our top 150 because he's 6,100 and he's point guard only. And we've got all these other options to work with at the point. So our point guard shares went away from D'Lo and into those guys. I do think that you can consider some D'Angelo Russell on the FanDuel slate. 61 is probably the more correct price for this situation for what he's going to do here. But we don't know that for sure. It's a little high. It's got him only at a 4.65 value, and the other guys are just running away with those shares. But if you came up with a couple in whatever you run, or if you had him projected for, I've only got him at 30 minutes. If you gave him 32, 34, he'd immediately start to get more and more competitive with those other guys. So I don't think you need to run screaming from a handful of D'Lo shares. But if for some reason you come up with like 15, 20% of him on FanDuel, I think you should be concerned and take a look at it, because there's just way better options at the point. But on DraftKings, again, absolutely critical. Ben Simmons, 44.6% on DraftKings, 6,000 point guard only, and I talked about him already on FanDuel because he's got the weird point guard and power forward eligibility, which is great. 63% exposed over there is a 5.68 value score. I took him back to 29 minutes. He's been playing 30 and change, or let's call it like 28 to 31 over the past few. I see no reason he wouldn't continue to do that. I think the prices are still not totally corrected. He's always been a relatively productive per minute guy that can completely disappear because he doesn't really have a shot or score, in traditional ways. But very solid assist rate at 40% so far this year and 11.4% rebounding rate. He does fill the stat line, and he's not that expensive. So I never mind getting I won't mind getting to some Ben Simmons here. I shouldn't say I never mind. Kobe White coming up at 21%, FanDuel 33%, DraftKings. Definitely a reasonable piece. That is just a super high-end game. High octane as far as the pace goes. Second highest total on the entire slate. Highest total on the DraftKings slate. Just a really appealing game. 6,900 on FanDuel, shooting guard and point guard eligible. Same price on DraftKings. We got a little bit more of him on DK, and we are with the field on DK, where we're undercutting him to the field on FanDuel. Again, probably just a product of all those other guys drawing shares. It's not that he's a bad play on FanDuel. He's just under our value threshold at 4.98. On other slates, that'd be a guy we'd be like, all right, he's under our value threshold, but we're going to want some Kobe White. I think you can take some Kobe White here, and he's a better play than the sim might be revealing there. Or he's a more, not better, but he's a more okay play, if that makes sense. Right? Like he's not a poor play. Lonzo Ball, I question a little bit more, and the sim's kind of backing that up. That one I'm a little bit more like, that's not a great option. 9%, if you have some shares of Lonzo, it's fine. Got him at 20 minutes today. He did play 26 the other day. He put up a 23.1 on FanDuel. For the season, he's been at 1.02. On DraftKings at 3,800, I do think you can get him. That's a totally different play than 45 on FanDuel. He's point guard only. There's no real flex there, but at least you get the guard spot to work with, so you can move him around somewhat. 32% below the field, but that's a 5.5. We're looking for 5.5 on DraftKings, so we're in okay territory with Lonzo's price being so low. If you get, again, we have Zach LaVine is questionable still. Let me actually check if anything's changed. So if you get no LaVine, there's just immediate uptick for everybody, basically. And then Dalen Terry's probable. Jalen Smith probable. I think we're all right at 9% here on FanDuel. Or just, again, if you're at this level and there's something more appealing, you just want to get extra shares at point guard. Not that it's a direct, 45 for him versus like 87 for Tyrese Maxey, but they both need to go into that same position, and you just shape lineups differently. I don't mind leaving that 9 and change percent of Lonzo entirely on the table for the public on FanDuel and just taking those point guard shares for better plays. He honestly doesn't look that great on FanDuel. DraftKings, totally different story at 38. KCP, 4,600, mix and match guy. I'm never a really big fan. 46 on FanDuel, can play, and we did 16% of the time. I think he goes into some lineups. He's fine as a filler. He's got multi-position on DraftKings. He's 100 less expensive on DK against that cap. 24% exposed, basically level with the field over there. Everything about his low end per minute performances applies on DraftKings still, but on the shorter slate that's less abundant with values at the guard spot or with critical options at the guard spot, I do think KCP fits into some of these lineups. 1-4, 1-5, somewhere around there, 20-24%. Directionally, if I'm taking KCP to a position relative to the field, I would probably be below the field. I do think he's a functional piece, though, because he's especially with that multi-position. If he was shooting guard only, he'd be coming up short, I think, or small forward only. I think he'd be coming up short. Freddie VanVleet, we really didn't get on FanDuel that's level with the Fields. Fields not there at 7,400. He's a 0.97 per minute guy this year. Realistic upside to a 1.06 kind of a performance from night to night, but I don't know if this is going to be that spot. What was the total in this one? 222 point total in this one. I think we're looking for better game environments overall to really try and press an advantage on VanVleet. What I was going to say is was with the field so low at like this 4%, and since we did get to a little bit, even with him being a sub 5 value score, at 74, that would be an okay-ish spot to just say, all right, I'm going to double that up and get a little bit of a position on a guy who can still get it done in a per-minute sense from time to time. But it's really not there today. He did do it. That's what drew the eye initially, 45.4 in 38 minutes the other day. If you get that today for your 7,400, that would be pretty decent. That's getting you into this kind of territory. So call it a wild card option on FanDuel. And then just on DraftKings 23%, with the field, he's just coming up again on the shorter slate with that lacks all these options for all those shares. Same thing's going to be true about your Dylan Brookses of the world. To some degree, your Jalen Brunsons of the world, although that's obviously a much better upside play. Same deal with Tyler Hero. Both of those guys, 82, 88 for Hero and Brunson respectively on FanDuel, 85, 89. Hero multi-position at both guard spots on both sides. Brunson point guard only. You can absolutely take shares of both guys. I think both of these guys are ones where if I had to take a position that's not on the board here, I would want more of either of these guys just because of their per-minute upside. For Brunson, great game environment. Should do whatever he wants against this Utah squad. It's a little difficult to say push to an upside position on when they're coming up like this. I think you're fine here. And I'd probably not look to level it back to the field, given that that's how we got exposed. That's still a decent chunk. You're getting 18.6% of Hero and nearly 15% of Brunson. So I think that's fine. A few additional shares in either direction, though, you're all right. You're not going to break your portfolio that way. Brooks, again, just is kind of a no thank you on FanDuel. That's another one where if I'm leaving this on the table alongside that Lonzo share and I'm just getting more and more shares to soak into those other guys that are coming up a lot better, I think that's perfectly fine. This is going to be an interesting one to talk about. There's a couple guys before we get there. Clay, just a mix and match piece on FanDuel. A little bit better looking on DraftKings, but again, level with the field at 14%. Directionally, I would draw that downward. He's only a 4.7 value when we're looking for 5+. We've got at least a couple better options up here that you can pivot those shares into for the same price, essentially, or a better price. But again, with with missing pieces, no Luka, most notably in Dallas. If Lively doesn't go, that just opens up even more opportunity for the starters and for the top end guys. So you can see the successful Clay day in the mix there. But he's not coming up critical right now. Mikal Bridges is definitely an interesting one. He's been playing really, really well lately. He's been a 0.83, I want to say. I think it was 0.83 for the month of December, which, has drawn up his season-long number up to 0.78, 0.80 on DraftKings from what was a much lower end start to the season. What was the number? I put him right at his. 0.86. Or maybe that. No, actually, I think it was 0.83, and then the game environment's giving him another little bump. Either way, Terrific option on FanDuel. 4.88 is a little short of the value score. We're probably getting most of that at small forward. 22% and level with the field over there. On DraftKings, 12% exposed below the field, but definitely a spot I think you can press a little bit and grab a few additional shares. Take them to like 15. You're probably still below the field. You're not going all the way back to the field, but I think I'd want a little bit more, or at least I'd be okay with a little bit more. Was our Thompson mix and match play on DraftKings and didn't come up at all on FanDuel? Multi-position eligible, small forward and shooting guard, 4,500 on FanDuel. It's kind of similar to whoever that was at 3,800 up here. Lonzo. Where just the price is more correct as a value play on DraftKings. So for 37, both forward spots, you can take shares. He's a 5+ value. We're looking for 5.5, but 5+ is okay. 1.01 per minute on the season is fine. Or actually, honestly, kind of appealing for just 3,700. You can do a lot worse as far as rate for dollar. And then there's Josh Giddey. We got him 36% of the time on FanDuel, and that's a hard undercut to the field because the site where the ownership is coming from had him as the highest owned FanDuel player. I get it that he should be very interesting here. But when I looked at the rate they had him projected at, and let me actually see if they changed it, because I think that was pushing too much in Giddey's direction. I think he looks terrific. He's been a 1.20 per minute player for the season. I have him at 1.35 for today, given the game environment. And I am like 5 raw fantasy points light of where they have him. To get him where they got him for this ownership, you would have to put him at a 1.5+. And I do not agree with that. So I think we're more correct at like this ownership. And if the field's going to run off with Josh Giddey, then I think, again, I think he's a good play. He came up a ton. He's projected at a 5.26 value score on FanDuel. Again, I gave him a 1.35 per minute today. Ahead of it, that's 0.15 per minute better than he's been playing all season. Or, excuse me, it's on a DraftKings scale, so it's up from 1.23 to 1.35. It's 0.13 more, or 1.12 more. The point is, he definitely is getting credit for this spot. I can't give him more credit than I'm giving him. I really don't see that. It's a great game environment. Ton of pace, push over opponent, but man, they are getting aggressive about it over there. So as much as it is of a Levine, Smith, and Dalen Terry in. So that's how it's projected right now, Power. I don't agree that Chicago looks terrible now. That's the situation we're already dealing with Chicago. Oh, I was like, have I been talking about all the positions? What time we at? 5:34 already. Jesus. This goes too quick. Especially when I start late. So this is done with Levine in, with Jalen Smith in, with Dalen Terry in. It's just the monster total and the pace in this game. This game's going to have, 6 to 10 more possessions than every game on the slate. And pushing both of these already pacey teams up in pace. I don't really see it looking bad, Power. I think it's still a really good spot. But again, Giddey, who we were just talking about, I think is overprojected on the site where the ownership came from. So we're going to want a ton. But we are undercutting that site's ownership. I'd be curious if that's undercutting, Awesemos and so on and so forth. On DraftKings, I agree. At 7,700, I agree with you, Power. DraftKings Giddey is too expensive. We got him at 11%. That's fine. He's a 4.9 value over there. Again, getting the same credit. Getting a 1.35 up from his 1.23. And if you want to give him another point and goose it a little bit more to get him or take a point away, you've got room in either direction. I just don't like to run completely wild with, and the model is built in a way that it doesn't run completely wild, giving guys credit for, things that they're not necessarily. Brendan Coons in the room. What's going on, buddy? Tyler Hill looks good. On DraftKings in particular, 8,500 point guard, shooting guard eligible, 18.6% exposed. A little bit light to the field, but Hero's one of those guys. I talked about him at the same time as I talked about Brunson a minute ago, where there's enough per minute upside and enough any given slate upside. It's just I typically leave a lot of heat on the table unless one of Bam or Jimmy are out. In that situation, the guy who plays and Tyler Hero both get nice little upticks. If Dunk doesn't go, maybe there's a little tiny nudge for Hero. I'd have to look at what the rates look like, but probably just an is who he is kind of a spot for Tyler Hero, but looks good in that situation against a pretty weak New Orleans team. White or Giddey FanDuel single entry? Where was White? It's got to be Giddey. You can see, the monster difference in the value score, 5.26 versus the 4.98. Again, we're cut by FanDuel positioning, but we're sorted by the DK exposures. So you got to look, our raw exposure to Giddey is at 36%, even though that's an undercut to where the field is. That just means he's a good play, right? When we see chalky guys, the way that this operates now, the public's not stupid anymore, or at least it's informed well. So the public number is going to be the best options, and you can just kind of gauge things by that. And in our sims, that backs it up. We got to a significant amount of Giddey, even if that's going against a flawed ownership number there. I think 36% versus the 20% that we got of Kobe White is pretty clear. The raw projection is very similar. The minutes are cut pretty similarly, but the value is different. 4.98 value score for the $6,900 option on Kobe White. You're getting a little bit more for your $7,000 out of Giddey at a 5.26. So that's the direction I'd lean. The public's going to be there, but it won't ultimately matter. You just get different in other spots. It's more about the combinations. .35 is his ceiling score for Mamba today. All right, cool. So we're on the same page. Yeah, 1-2, that should be his season-long number. That's calculating just from the NBA board. It's coming from right here, which is pasted in today, and those are the season-long totals. I do have to hit the gas pedal here a little bit. We got like 20 minutes. I do want to get out of here at 6-ish so that we can get some updates and be on top of everything. We've talked through most of the critical guards. Let me just look for guys that are popping from site to site. 15% of Levine and level with the field, and now we know he's going to play. Is who he is spot ultimately, but another guy pushed a little bit by the game environment. That's accounted for in here. He's still a sub-5 value score. I don't love it, but I wouldn't take him out of lineups if I got him. 15%, basically the same deal with Dunk Robinson in the New Orleans-Miami game. Fine with getting him, but not a guy I'm looking for necessarily. He's just 4% exposed on DraftKings. Levine was at 6% and slightly below the field. Trey Murphy came up a little bit light at 8%. 8 to 10 is fine there. If you're pushing 12, you're probably about with the field. I think that's okay, but he's only at a 4.62 value now. His price has gone up with his production. He's been good. Same deal on FanDuel, 3% over there. DeJounte Murray not really coming up. Mix and match guys. All these guys from the mid-range right here are just coming up in mix and match shares. They're all fine. Not one of them is a priority. Not one of them is close to even a 5 value. And then you thin out completely on DraftKings. And then you get to Emmanuel Quickly, who apparently is landing in 42% of FanDuel lineups. I kind of wish I hadn't scrolled down. Quickly still questionable to play. He's played 3 games this year, 22.5 minutes. Has he gotten back yet, though? I didn't even look. I was not honestly expecting that where I had him. They played during the day yesterday, right? Yeah, Quickly hasn't made it back yet. Second half of a back-to-back with other guys questionable. Maybe it's some guys in and he gets into it. But Yeah, that's not one I love. 5,500 too. Where the hell? Do I have him like projected through the moon by accident? I'm just going to take that away. Let's see. We didn't get him at all on DraftKings. You don't have to worry about it. On FanDuel at 5,500 for reason. I mean, that's a 5.3 value, so that's the reason. That's the thing. Even if I knock him down to... That'll cut it. 4.9. Yeah. I think that's where we're going to go. He was getting a little bit of a game environment bonus. Or no, it's not a game environment bonus. They're losing a position. Or a couple possessions. Where in the hell did that bonus come from? All right. I can't waste time on this now, but suffice to say, you'll probably still get a little bit if you just run it pure with these numbers. I don't love it at 26 minutes. I don't know that for sure we're getting him at all. First game back. And a lower end game environment on the Toronto side of that one. I'm really not sure where that came from. I didn't catch that when I was going through it because it was close to, he's not far off of like what his career looks like. But he was getting an inappropriate bump there by about 2 points. So that'll come down somewhat. And you don't have to worry about it on DK. Otherwise, Jalen Suggs, mix and match, he is, probable to play? Is who he is spot for Suggs at worst. 4.8 value on FanDuel. We're not really there. There's so many other options. Let's jump positions. I'm going to get forwards. And I'm going to put the centers on the board too to kind of consolidate this because we got about 17 minutes. So let's just do all these guys because they're all essentially the same positions anyway. Power says the Jordy Fernandez comments about D'Lo and Maxwell Lewis had me lower my D'Lo ownership. I've been drinking a little bit, big enough a win this week. Congrats, buddy. I don't know what they were. Doesn't make sense. We would play D'Lo. He's certainly trade bait. What did they say? So they haven't practiced with the team yet. Tells me he doesn't start, and who knows on the minutes. I think yes on the minutes part. That's why I've got him a little bit conservative at 30 minutes. I think he does start though. And yeah, I kind of agree that. I hesitate to use the word lock on shows, but I think he's the most critical piece on DraftKings right now. All right, let's get into here's your differentiated guys. I'm going to start by talking about the guys that are on both sites, but there's obviously from those last two games on FanDuel a number of guys named Domantas Sabonis, Jalen Johnson, who might not play now, Paul George, who we talked about already, MPJ, Michael Porter Jr. at both forward spots looking really strong and above the field, DeMar DeRozan looking really good, Clint Capella, some shares of Christian Brown, who we talked about before, getting a decent share of Caleb Martin for just 4,700 at both forward spots with solid 34 minutes for 4,700. That's not bad. So definitely some options to consider up there. We'll get back to those guys. Let me start with the guys that are on both sides so I don't bore the DK people. So Benji Simmons, we already talked about. He's coming up now because he's got that power forward eligibility on FanDuel. So again, it'd be interesting to see where he falls overall. But looking like a pretty critical piece on FanDuel and an interesting one on DraftKings. He's in play on both sites. I think you should definitely have some on both sites. The per minute numbers support the value at these prices. Patty Williams, 4,500 on FanDuel, 42% exposed. We're above the field, solid 5.59 value score, way above our threshold. He's closer to the mark on DraftKings. 5.40 is below the 5.5 that we want, but it's still one of the best value scores overall among all forward eligible players on the shorter DraftKings slate. So I think you're going there. 43%. The sim definitely wants us there, well above the field, looking like a very interesting piece. And again, another guy coming out of that super high-end game environment in Washington. Got him at 28 minutes, too. He played 32 the other day. He only put up a 19.6 FanDuel score. He's just a 0.80 per minute player on FanDuel, a 0.81 per minute player on DraftKings. But the minutes are there, and he could play 30 plus. So that would just make him look better and better. Josh Hart, not coming up too much on FanDuel, unfortunately. We got a fair amount of cat on FanDuel. I just want more of my Knicks in this situation. As usual with the Knicks, we're going to want any of the starting five is going to look pretty good at worst. And then two of them are going to get there and two of them are going to be all right, but not quite where you want them. Yeah, that's how it's been falling, but everybody's had their moments. Everybody's had their games, and they're all very interesting players who play 35 plus minutes basically every game regardless of situation. So I think you can go to Knicks. I think you can go to Josh Hart a little bit more aggressively than the sim is. With him in the single digits, that's one where you could build your position as a plus. You could take him up to 10, 12% owned and have a little house on a hill on Josh Hart there. That said, 4.64 value score is kind of glaring amongst all those fives. So maybe we don't run away with it at 7,700. At 73, he's looking like a big piece on DraftKings. We got him 40%. We're well above the field there. I like that option a lot. 4.93 value score, but we're getting him positionally, I think. He's coming up. That value among small forwards, I think, is where it's landing. Because, all these guys up here are power forward and centers. Everybody in this territory is worse value than that, except for, your $3,200 Dylan Brooks, Johnny Juzang options. So I can see where, just for a spend, that 4.93 is working out for Hart among the forward positions a lot. Very solid option. 3 Knicks in a row right here. Karl-Anthony Towns on DraftKings, one of the critical pieces of the day. 1.46 per minute with upside into the 1.5 plus territory in this matchup. Should be able to push around Utah and do whatever he wants. At worst, more Karl-Anthony Towns because we're light on those last two games. There's no Jokic on the DraftKings slate, so definitely love the cat play on DraftKings. At 99 on the FanDuel slate, 8.6%. It's another spot. In single-digit territory, I can take more. If I can get to 15% and be against the field at 7.5%, 8%, 10%, any advantage I can gain on that spot, I would take. OG comes up huge on FanDuel. 6,300. He's a little bit low priced. 0.86 per minute. Played up a 32.1 in 34 minutes the other day. Plays a ton. Does a lot on the court. He can score the ball. He gets his hands on the ball a ton. He's an okay rebounder, not a great facilitator, but just accrues fantasy points and can create fantasy points. So, big fan of OG. 6,200 on DraftKings, 6,300 both forward spots on both sites. I think he's just got a nice lane at that price, kind of like what I was saying about Hart on DraftKings. They just both kind of cruise into shares, even though technically the 5.21, that's better than Hart's value score, but still shy of our 5.5. But again, one of the top end values overall in a per minute sense, in a points per dollar sense. So I like him on both sites, and I like that we're getting some of them on FanDuel here. Alex Sarr did not come up on FanDuel at 62. Did come up quite a bit on DraftKings, 28% exposed over there for 5,800. Not a bad option. 1.0 per minute. Not worried about too much defense against him coming out of the Knicks. Not really what they do this year. It's funny. I think I retweeted it. Somebody got called out from, I forget what organization. I think, where was it? Because this I have time. I have plenty of time to waste time on. Was it from this one? I must have sent it from the other one. I think it was like the Sporting News. Yeah, Sporting News. An account, Knicks Muse, on Twitter caught this and called him out for it. Sporting News proposes that the defensive-minded Knicks trade OG Anunoby for Brendan Ingram to solve their issue of scoring the basketball. And the quote, the actual article from Sporting News is, is it enough offense? The Knicks will be able to wear down most teams with their gritty, defensive-minded style. And while adding Cat this offseason was a huge boost for their offense, New York might still struggle to keep scoring pace with a team like the Boston Celtics. Should the Knicks go after Ingram to solve the above issue? They'd have to give up Anunoby to get Ingram. There's no other trade that really works. That was written last year at best. That is just a wildly inaccurate take about this year's Knicks. Anyway, so that's to say that Sarr is not going to be facing like overly aggressively good defense here and should be fine on DraftKings at that price. At 62 on FanDuel, you really don't need to go there, and there's so many other options with all those other guys that are on the FanDuel slate. Goga, as mentioned, has power forward eligibility on FanDuel now, which I think makes him super interesting. The ability to pair his per minute marks with some of the other top end centers now on FanDuel is great. You can always do that on DraftKings because you got the util spot to work with, but now we can do it on FanDuel. He came up 50% of the time in our top 150 at 7,000, even with some of these options on the slate. Love, love, love the power forward eligibility on Goga. I've got him at 30 minutes. Played 33.9 the other day, put up a 47.7. He's been playing at a 1.19 per minute. As long as all those other big bodies are out for Orlando, just keep firing away on Goga right now, and especially given that new eligibility. 28% looking like an is who he is situation on DraftKings, 6,900. That is a good play. That's an interesting option with a 5.3 value score. So definitely like the Goga shares. I like the idea of pairing Goga and Cat on the FanDuel slate, on both slates actually, but in particular on the DraftKings slate, with Goga coming up at 28%, Cat coming up at 32.6. That's an interesting big man pairing. Bam, again, I tend to get Bam when Jimmy's out. I tend to get Jimmy when Bam's out. I'll take Hero all the time, but any one of those three guys looks better when one of the other two are out. 24% of Bam is a different play on DraftKings. Again, you're just shy by 2 games over there. So I think FanDuel, some of the shares are disappearing into other spots, and he's not looking like a great value. 5.16, though, is we're above our threshold there. It's actually a better FanDuel value at 5.16 than a DraftKings value at 4.93. So it's probably just because we're light on options on the DK slate as compared. Şengün, 4% FanDuel, 18% DraftKings, probably the same thing. 5.15 value for 9,000 on FanDuel versus a 4.89 for 9,500 on DraftKings. But we get more on DraftKings, level with the field. Everybody's getting more on DraftKings because there are fewer options overall. It's just how it's coming together. But if you're talking about it in terms of, is he as good an option as some of these other guys? No. You can see it in the value marks. So that's something to pivot around. With both of these guys landing basically with the field, and both of those guys being sub 5, let alone 5.5 values, I can take some of these shares, draw it to more of like this kind of an angle, as far as just our, pictorial here. Draw it down a little bit while still having some, and take those shares and put them into some of these options up here. Because those guys are coming up as better values. They're coming up as more critical to the slate. You still want some spread, though, for sure, among the bigs on DraftKings. It's coming up fairly flat. But that's when everything is fairly flat across like 9 guys like that. That's what creates that situation where you can say, all right, the field's flat. My results are flat. That means I can move some of these guys and exchange pieces and parts for whatever reason strikes your fancy. Johnny's Juzang got starting run the other day, played 22.9, put up 20.3 fantasy points. For 3,900 on FanDuel, I've got him at just 16 fantasy points in 24 minutes. Is not giving him credit for the kind of performance he had the other day. At 3,200 on DraftKings, we're getting him. At 3,900 on FanDuel, we're really not. And that could go away entirely. He basically needs to start to have that 24-minute projection. He's played 17 a night overall. I would lower him to 16 if he doesn't start. But if he's in the starting lineup, for 3,200, you can mix and match your way to some shares. We got him 14%, little above the field. I'd be happy with less. I don't think I'd be too happy with more. Dylan Brooks, again, mix and match. We talked about him during guards. Bridges we talked about. Clay we talked about. Precious is semi-interesting. 12% on DraftKings, not at all on FanDuel. 4,500 power forward center. He's irrelevant to the FanDuel slate unless he stepped into like 30 minutes. But at that DraftKings price, it's not completely off the board. 0.92 per minute. Plays about 20 minutes a night. 19 and a half. And as I've said a number of different times, Tibbs likes to have him out there because of what he does for rim protection for this team. He erases what I was saying about some of their ineptitude defensively against bigs. So on a day where he catches 22, 24 minutes, you do pick up upside. I think he's just a play to keep around this. If you were taking him directionally, it would be downward, take him down to half that, 6%. But I think being around 10, 12 is fine. And you could spike a little bit of upside for just a cheap value square. Tobias Harris, not a player I ever really get overly excited about unless it's a situational spot, and it's really not. 11.3%. He's a 5+ value score on DraftKings, but we need 5.5 there. He's just okay. FanDuel is barely on the board at all. We did get 30% of Cam Johnson on the FanDuel slate. That's below the field, but he's a 5+ value score. We're also getting 5.17 out of Noah Clowney on the same team. Tyrese Martin coming up a little light on FanDuel. All three of those guys are just mix and match guys, and I would keep them in this kind of territory. Level at best with the field. Preferably a little bit of an undercut to the field. Any one of them is fine. We've seen Cam Johnson succeed in the reduced version of the Nets in a few different situations this year. But I think if I'm going heavy Nets, we'll take our 30% or thereabouts. But if I'm going heavy Nets, it's probably more D-Lo on DraftKings. And then, was anybody? Ben Simmons on FanDuel. Directionally, I would probably drop that to like 25, maybe even 20%, honestly. And just claw back some shares. That's a playable price where I think I'd just rather have that $6,800 spent on better options. If I'm taking less Cam Johnson and getting more Mikal Bridges for $200 less, I think I'm happy about that. Even with a little bit of a value advantage going in Cam Johnson's direction. Even with Mikal drawing it mostly out of minutes in a head-to-head sense. Cam Johnson's indisputably the better per minute guy. But I think that's the direction I would take that, considering we're already coming up with have some but be lighter than the field. I'd probably get a little bit more aggressive about undercutting the field on Cam Johnson. And if he goes off, if he has a big day, I'll take my lumps. More often than not, we're getting him around a point per minute. Levine, we talked about mix and match play at best, but great game environment there. Dunk Robinson, same deal. We talked about him. Again, everybody through here in the not quite mid-range, a lot of lower-end pieces in here as far as the cost goes, but like Nikola Jovic, Cam Whitmore, Koulibaly, Tyrese Martin, any one of these guys with a situational change that creates a little bit of an uptick in projection for these prices could get more interesting, and that could happen to Jovic. That could happen to Cam Whitmore. So at least keep an eye on some of these guys, but right now not showing a ton. Timmy Hardaway for 3,600, 4% level with the field. I'm perfectly fine being there. We didn't get him at all on FanDuel for 39. I think that's totally justified. As bad as Timmy's always been in a per minute sense, he's down at 0.56 on FanDuel this year, 0.59 on DraftKings. It's just been gross. So I'm happy to leave it on the table. If I have a few shares, fine. If you wanted to argue that you could take a little bit and gain an advantage, sure, but what a low-end play to do that with. Like, 4% there on a $3,600 0.59 per minute guy. Why not take more of, I don't know, $3,700 Azar Thompson? It was a 1.01. He's essentially double the per minute rate out of the same team. Fewer minutes, sure, but essentially double the rate. Projected better than Timmy. And there's other options for the Tyrese Martin's right there at 38. Again, a lower end minutes projection, but a better per minute performer at 0.90. It's not difficult to be a better per minute performer than Tim Hardaway Jr. Essentially everyone in the league is. Kuzma not really coming up. Jimmy Butler not really coming up. RJ Barrett not really coming up. Might not play. One share of him, one share of Jalen Duren. We did get 6% of Jalen Wilson coming out of that Brooklyn side of that Brooklyn-Toronto game, 4,200. He's pretty cheap, but he's just a 0.63 per minute guy. Definitely not my favorite option. There's plenty of minutes there for cheap, but 31.2 minutes the other day. We only got a 20. That's right in this territory. I don't love that. Mama's saying the Goga lock button. I love the Goga play. Oh, RJ Barrett out. All right, there you go. Grady Dick will be that heat. Quickly, we'll have a minutes limit. All right. Let me get in. It is right on 6 o'clock, and we just went through centers. Let me clean up the top of the FanDuel board again. So Jokic, we got him 8% and below the field, but as usual, take more if you can get it, right? If you're at 15% against an 8% ownership share on Nikola Jokic, the easily best overall per minute guy and best player on this slate, so be it. You're happy about that. 12% of Sabonis, sure. Jalen Johnson might come off the board again. Got downgraded to questionable just before the show. So keep an eye on that spot. But if he does go, love the option. 1.24 per minute on FanDuel this year. Very, very good player. 5.14 is well above our value threshold for 9,000. Just a good pay-up option late. And you can have shares in your pocket in the sense that he's going to be probably questionable post-lock. So have those shares. There's plenty of swappability among all these guys. There's similarly priced options, similar upside options. You can take your Sabonis shares. You can put everything into Sabonis, and then in the other direction, if Jalen Johnson does play, then you can draw down your Sabonis, put it into Jalen Johnson, and upgrade something else. Like that probably gets you from Michael Porter to Paul George in a lot of cases. If you're there and go to there, you can go from there to there. Not that one is necessarily better. I mean, MPJ is technically looking like the better play between those two. But Paul George has the better raw upside, I would say. Both guys coming up quite a bit, though. 22% of Paul George with upside for more. And again, if things change, and there's a lot of Q tags in Philly right now. So if things change, we get more Paul George. Michael Porter Jr. just in an is who he is kind of a situation. We're getting a lot of 28% and well above the field. I like that spot. That Atlanta-Denver game, remember, is a great, great game environment. If that was on both sites, we would hit on that a lot more. That's a 247.5 point total. The Chicago-Washington game that we're all excited about at the beginning of the night is a 237.5 point total with a similar point spread. So everybody is elevated in this Atlanta-Denver game. Don't ignore this on FanDuel. DeRozan, 16%, level a little bit above the field. Not my favorite player, sub 5 value scorer. I'd be happy if some of these went away and we leveled him off to the field, and I'll take more MPJ. I'll take more Paul George in a head-to-head. But he's fine. DeMar DeRozan's always okay around a point per minute. DeAndre Hunter, upside in that game. Clint Capella, upside in that game. Level with the field at 13%. Given that value mark at 5.57, my only question with Clint Capella, as usual, is the minutes. Can I get him to 28 even? He played 26.6 in the last one, put up 34.4 for 5,400. That's a good buy. It can be a better buy if we can get him to 28 minutes. But definitely an option. There's also a blocker at the center-only spot, but that's why I love, again, Goga with power forward eligibility helps. Goga and Capella paired together, it's pretty decent. Drummond, no, unless something changes. Right now, I've got it just as a 24-minute split. Kelly Oubre is coming up a little bit, but might not go. Get him level with the field if he plays. Obviously, if he doesn't, you don't play him. Caleb Martin would benefit a little bit if other guys don't go, already at 34 minutes in the starting group. But just if other players aren't out there, there's a little bit of float for everybody to gain ground game usage. That said, 0.68 per minute. He's a terrible per minute option. Put up just 17 in this exact situation the other day in 37 minutes. Onyeka Okongwu not coming up unless something happened to Capella or the minutes flip, then you get the other side of that situation. Everybody else basically off the board. With that in mind, you guys, let me punch out of here real quick toward the end of the show here. You all rock. I love every single one of you guys. Happy New Year again. If you weren't here yesterday, thank you guys so much for a great 2024, for all the subscriptions, all the memberships at the site. Check out rotoscouts.com for all your projections need across all the 4 major sports. More to come over there. Under $1 a day for access to everything across the board. Check out our guys at acemind.io where we run these sims. Promo code RotoScouts still gets you 20% off your first month over there. Talking about developing out more with those guys soon. So hopefully exciting things to come. Good luck out there tonight. Somebody go win something. Come on back for tomorrow for more. I'll see you guys.